Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel and my latest build video. My wife and I are both teachers up here in Alberta, Canada, and with all that's going on in the world, our classrooms have become different rooms in our own house. Teaching from home is tough, especially with our two kids running around and needing attention. So I decided that we needed a dedicated workspace for our computers, textbooks, and lesson plans. It's a pretty simple, sleek design, so let's get to it. I started this desk project by milling some 2-inch thick white oak boards for the top. I first lay the boards flat on the jointer to get one flat face. You can hear as the board passes over that there was a little bit of a bow in the board. The front of the board touches while the middle is raised, and then the back of the board also touches the blades. I needed to get rid of that. So as I run it across the jointer, it creates a nice even flat face. Once I have a flat face, I put that face against the fence and flatten the adjacent edge. You can see in this close-up clip that as I run the board across the knives of the jointer, it's giving it a nice, clean, flat edge. This is crucial when you're gluing boards together. Next, I went to the planer and brought each board down to its final thickness. For this build, I wanted the top to be rather thick, so they are finished at about 1 3/4 of an inch. It's a little cameo for my wife and son, as he is already so curious when he can hear Dad working in the garage. He likes to come and check things out. Once my dust collector was empty, I moved to the table saw and ripped my boards to the right width. I knew I wanted the desk to be somewhere around 20 inches wide, so I left myself a bit of wiggle room, ripping each board to 7 inches. That way, after I glued the 3 boards together, I'd have roughly 21 inches so I could make some final cuts later on. After the boards were ripped to the right width, I could focus on gluing the pieces together. Here, I'm laying out the location for all of the dominoes that I'm going to add. The domino is definitely my most loved tool in my shop. It here is going to help me with the alignment since the top would be too wide for my planer after it was all glued together. I know that this is a luxury tool, but the same result could be achieved with a dowel or biscuit joiner. Next, I glued the boards together, making sure to spread the glue evenly and watch for good squeeze out. It's incredible how little clamping pressure you need to apply when your boards are nice and square to begin with. While that glue dries, I'll move on to the welding components of this build. I cheated here a bit and had the steel supplier cut my pieces to the size that I needed. It makes my life a lot easier. Before welding, I wiped each tube down with some paint thinner to clean off any grease or residue. Next, I started to build each side of the base. It's basically just an A-frame with a flat top. I put the bottom support in 10 inches up from the bottom of each leg and then clamped everything together, checking for square frequently. I tacked each piece in place on both faces and then did the same on the other side. Once everything was tacked in place, I went ahead and welded them together. My welds are getting better and better, and I think for my next project, I'll move on from flux core and finally upgrade to some MIG gas. Now that the two sides were welded together, I needed to add the stretchers. 2 on the top and then 1 that runs 10 inches up on what will be the back of the desk. Again, I used some welding magnets and clamps, making sure everything was square, and then welded it together. Once all that was together, I ground down all the welds with a flap desk in my angle grinder. Finally, it's getting warm enough that I can open the garage and work outside a little bit. I took the top out of the clamps and used my track saw to cut it to the right length, first cutting one side, then measuring 48 inches and cutting the other side. I have a decent sized piece of offcut that I'll turn into a large charcuterie board. Next, I hit each side of the top with some 100 grit sandpaper to clean off any glue residue and hit a couple of high spots to make sure the top was nice and flat. While I was outside, I also applied a couple of coats of primer and paint to the desk base. I used a Rust-Oleum matte black spray paint. This has been my go-to look on a lot of my steel projects. As the paint was drying, I took the top back onto my workbench. I routed the top edge with a 1/8 inch round over bit and then sanded from 100 all the way up to 180 grit. Now that the paint was dry and the top sanded, I could bring the two together. I placed the base on the bottom of the desk and used a Forstner bit to punch where I would need to drill holes for threaded inserts. The tabs that I welded onto the base have an oversized hole drilled into them so that when I attach the base, it allows for expansion and contraction of the wood. I then drilled into the bottom of the desk and installed the brass threaded inserts. I add a bit of paste wax to the inserts to ensure they go in nice and smoothly. These are great and allow the base to be removed and reinstalled over and over without worrying about screws stripping out. With the end in sight, I heated up my branding iron and applied the brand to the bottom of the table. Then I applied some Odie's oil as a finish with a Scotch-Brite pad. I applied a generous amount, let it sit for about half an hour, and then came back and wiped off any excess with a blue shop towel. After it was all dry, I put the base back on and used 1/4 by 20 bolts and attached it to the top. Just like that, this project was done and ready for us to work from home next week. I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. Like I said earlier, it's a pretty straightforward design that is classy and will last forever. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Thanks so much. See you soon.